So, does everyone have a Bible? Let's turn to Matthew 5. And
Student Bible, Vicky, is that okay?
it sure is.
Okay.
Sometimes it's interesting to have slightly different
I love the student Bible.
versions. I'm going to be borrowing some thoughts from a sermon that John Buchanan preached on Matthew 5 in 1990, as well as some commentary from Walter Wink, who's a biblical scholar. So, the Beatitudes make up the first portion of chapter 5, and I'd love for us to read that plus just one other portion, because this chapter, of all the chapters in the Bible, I think we could spend a month on each verse trying to understand and figure out what it means, or maybe it's obvious what it means, and then the struggle is how do we live into it. So, who would like to read, or we could just start. We'll start with Susan and give you a moment. Susan, would you start with 5 verse 1, and Debbie just take verse 2, and we'll just go through the Beatitudes.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him.
Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted.
Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled.
Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account.
This is the message, so it's a little different. Not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me.
Yeah, sure. So, it's interesting. Larry was actually sharing with me how Nadia Boltz-Weber interprets this. Larry, do you want to just share a little bit about what you were saying to me?
It's not so much that it's not an exhortation for us to follow, but she said actually it's a blessing that we've already received.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's more a statement of fact as opposed to telling us what to do. And then she expanded it to each person, each condition to cover many more every day, what we might even consider mundane activity.
Great. So that would be, is that something we can Google and find online? So Beatitudes?
It's from, it's called Some Modern Beatitudes, a sermon for All Saints Sunday. It's on her blog.
Okay. So I commend that to you, because that's exactly the way I interpret the Beatitudes, is they're statements of reality. They're statements of how God works in our lives. So you might want to think, which of these verses do you most identify with this morning? Do you feel like you're poor in spirit? Are you mourning? Are you hungering for righteousness? Are you acting mercifully toward others? Are you pure in heart? Are you trying to make peace? Have you been persecuted recently, or whatever Blake said, been put down? And if that's you, then this is the way that life will be for you, because of the way that God works in your life. The Spanish version that I've heard that was lifted up years ago, instead of the word blessed are, was good adventure too. So that's also an interesting way to think about it, as in our journey of life, in our journey of faith, this is the way that you will experience God's blessing.
Vicky,
Yes.
something that has troubled me, particularly in the last year, is blessed are, but then they will be.
Mm-hmm.
The blessing is right here, but then what feels like the blessing is in the will be part.
True. And isn't that the way it is?
It does seem like a tension.
Yeah, I mean.
Coming up on
if-
the anniversary of my father's death for the first year.
Right.
And it's going to be the 14th anniversary of my mother's death, same date. And so I know the pace a little bit, but I don't know the times it's doubled versus it's squared. And I know that the comfort will come, but there are days when I just want it now.
Sure, of course.
And I have trouble with blessed are versus comfort will be.
So the blessed are is more about your personhood, who you are, and the for you shall be is the blessing that you have yet to receive, right? So you are God's blessed child. You are God's beloved. And you will experience this from me as a blessing to come if you're not experiencing it now.
Vicky, I'm sorry, you quoted, blessed are those who adventure, what was it?
Good adventure to you that's a Spanish version that I first read when I was studying the base Christian community movement in South America. Yeah. Now, we are not, today our way we're going to study the Bible is quite different from what you're used to or will probably do again because of the phrase, live your way into a new way of thinking. You don't think your way into a new way of living. So usually we do a lot of thinking, but we're going to do an exercise in a little while in which I actually want you to enter into experiencing one of these passages. So don't get nervous. You don't have to act in front of anyone else or anything like that. But I want to point out a couple of things first. So chapters 5 through 7 in Matthew are called the Sermon on the Mount. And you'll notice at the beginning of chapter 5, it says Jesus went up the mountain. Now, we don't know if he actually went up the mountain or if Matthew is choosing to place him in that context because of when you think of a mountain in the Bible, who comes to mind? Moses. And what did he do when he went up that mountain? He talked to God, and what did he bring back down? The 10 Commandments. And so Matthew may be purposely portraying Jesus as the new Moses, bringing to us these new commandments, only as Larry pointed out, they're not so much commandments, prescriptions for what we try to live into in this first part, but there are certainly prescriptions for how we're called to live in much of the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. And you also get this echo when Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, which would refer to the law, but I say to you, and what he's doing is not weakening the law, taking away the law, but giving us a new definition of the very basis for moral living. So,
Are you talking about beyond verse 12 then, and all that?
yes, much of this other. Well, I mean, salt and light is also a statement of who we are, our identity, who we're called to be. But then you get into, well, let's just take a look. Verse 17, do not think that I have come to abolish the law. I've come to fulfill it. And then we start getting into meddling, right? What do you mean I'm not supposed to get angry? Or what do you mean I'm not supposed to commit adultery? So I remember I did a children's story, meaning had the kids come up in front of the sanctuary during a worship service and talked about the 10 Commandments. And there were a pair of twins who were 4 years old. And I was going through them, and one of them raised her hand, and so I called her, and she goes, I never killed anybody. And then all the other kids, I never killed anybody. So some of those 10 Commandments, we can get by. We can do pretty well. Most of us haven't killed anybody. But these get a lot closer to home. So Jesus is using the beginning point of his definition of goodness is grounded in the Old Testament commandments and rules and regulations and all the accumulated commentary and interpretations, which are called the Torah. And the Pharisees believed that the law was the light in the darkness, and it was Israel's gift from God that revealed God. And they believed God was worshiped and served by keeping the law. And though they sometimes get a bad rap, even by Jesus, they essentially were good people who were generous, kind, and responsible, and they really tried to follow what they thought God most wanted. And Jesus agreed that the religious law in its traditional definition was valid for what it meant to be a good person. But at the same time, he is, in this Sermon on the Mount, teaching his followers that he expects more from them than the goodness that's been exhibited by the Pharisees. Now, that's not possible if law defines goodness. So you cannot keep the commandment to refrain from killing any more than by not killing, right? It's not ambiguous, and under most circumstances, as I said, it's not difficult to keep, even for 4-year-olds. So what Jesus does here is deepen and intensify the traditional law by moving its focus away from behavior and toward your inner spirit, your motivation, your attitude, your inclination, and that does get ambiguous very quickly. Now, that's not to say that your behavior doesn't matter, and as I'm learning more and more about systemic racism, I'm hearing more and more that you may have had good intentions, but the impact can still be harmful. So we need to constantly explore our behavior and its impact, as well as our inner spirits. But when what Jesus said about anger and murder and lust and adultery would make all of us murderers and adulterers. And for 20 centuries, Christians have been struggling to find ways to interpret and live his approach to morality. So if you were to live literally by the standards that Jesus teaches here, you would have to withdraw from the world. And that is what some Christians have chosen to do, such as the Amish. But the other option is to take seriously that Jesus was concerned about our hearts, our inner soul, where our humanity is established. He obviously wants responsibility, but he's also giving latitude in which we end up needing to make very difficult decisions, because things in our heart and in what we do are not always self-evident. In the 5th century, St. Augustine, who was the Bishop of Hippo, was asked by a new Christian convert what the ethical requirements of Christianity were, and he answered, "Love and do as you please." So, this is another New Testament scholar said, what Jesus wants is not new behavior, but a new being. Now, there is so much in this that we are just going to focus this morning on verses 21 through 26. So let's, where did we leave off? Okay. Yes, so we'll start, yes, that good news, okay.
You have heard that it was said of those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment."
But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire.
So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you,
leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister,
and then come and offer your gift.
Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on your way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison.
Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you take the last day.
Okay, we're not going to talk about that last verse. And my apologies to those of you who heard my sermon in the 8 o'clock service. It just turns out this has never happened to me before, where my assigned scripture for what I'm teaching is the same assigned scripture what I was to preach. So a little of this will be familiar to you, but we're going to try to expand it some. So let's first look at concerning anger. If you are angry with your brother or sister, you are liable to judgment. So let's talk about this. Can you control whether you feel anger or not? No. Emotions just rise up in us, don't they? So we know we can't control that. So what does this really mean? What do you think has happened through the centuries when Christians have tried to deny or repress their anger? Or what happens to you when you try to deny or repress your anger?
It builds up, it comes out sideways.
It has to come out somewhere.
Okay, it can build up and come out, seep out sideways, or you blow up or something, right? Okay, how can you redirect?
Take that energy and put it into something constructive.
Okay.
Because the emotion generates energy.
Okay, you could rechannel your energy.
Sometimes I wonder.
I try to, what happens, I try to think in terms of moving forward. How can I, change my feeling of anger so I can move forward? For instance, I went to some place with a friend and she really screwed up the situation and I didn't understand what happened, whether she was acting up or she forgot something or she misunderstood, So when I saw her, I didn't say, I didn't confront her because I wanted to have a good time with her. I didn't want to ruin the whole day because of what she did, Mm-hmm. So I just said, how come you didn't let me know, and she said something, anyway, I tried to de-emphasize what happened, and tried to redirect it to the future so I could move forward.
Okay, so you didn't deny that you were angry, but you kept working with it.
Right. Well, before I met her, it was like another 1 hour. I was thinking what I was going to do because I really got upset.
Right. Oh, we come up with all kinds of things. Margaret?
Sometimes I wonder whether the national obsession with sports is part of denying anger. But you have a miserable day at work, go scream at your team. Either get cheered up by them or yell out the anger at the other side or yell at the anger at your own side if your own team's not doing very well.
There are a number of people who believe that anger is a second emotion, that it comes usually after you first are hurt or scared or who knows what else, lost or confused or something. And then the anger comes. So sometimes dealing with anger is to also explore what is making me so upset. Try to get underneath it. Do you think does anyone have a New English Bible translation of this particular verse? It says, anyone who nurses anger will be brought to judgment. And that would be parallel to another reference in the New Testament about anger, which is Ephesians 4:26-27. Be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not make room for the devil. So, think about what either do not nurse your anger or don't let the sun go down on your anger. How do you think letting the sun go down on your anger might make room for the devil?
Well, it's the whole kind of being able to have the courage to deal with that anger, talk to the person you're angry with, and try to reconcile. To me, it's a cry for sooner
Right, and we're gonna get into that, those verses that immediately follow this as well. Any other thoughts about why it's good? How do you make room for the devil if you go to bed while you're still angry?
Just the idea of nursing your anger reminded me of a great line in a Robert Burns poem called Tam O'Shanter, when a character is nursing her wrath to keep it warm. And that nursing idea, it increases the anger, it makes it warm, it makes it grow.
Escalates it.
And if you don't nurse it, if you let it out, then it goes away, and that takes the opportunity away from the devil to not get involved in that situation.
Now, I know in my world, sometimes I purposely choose not to send an email or not to have a conversation until I'm less upset. I don't think that's what this is about. I think as soon as you can shift over into a place where you are not your anger, but you can step back and reflect about what you're feeling, then you start moving into that place where you can make some choices. And so sometimes I will go to bed when I'm still angry, but I'm over into that space where I'm praying about it, or I know that I'm going to do something about it, but I've decided I'm going to wait to do something about it till I know that I can be calm or not blaming somebody else.
The converse of that is some people write the email or the letter, but they never send it. They put it in there, and it's away just. And so then at 3 o'clock, when you have those 3 o'clock in the morning conversations with yourself, it's sort of taken. It's not as intense.
It takes the sting out.
Right. So the next morning you wake up, things are a little bit better in balance.
Right.
I'd like to give a tip to anybody who does that, like me. Don't put anything in the address line.
Very good. Yes. I used to consult with churches in conflict, and I would always say to them, if you receive an email that makes you mad, wait 24 hours before you reply. But even then, don't reply by email. Try to talk in person or on the phone.
Well, what you just said is what I was going to say. I mean, I know this isn't a psychology class, but the whole, using email to send angry or response to anger messages, I actually see that in the workplace.
Right.
And try to end it.
Right.
Pick up the phone.
Exactly. When you it's way too easy to just write something and send it. It means you don't have to be with someone in person, but the reason why you need to be in person, because you can't hear, if 90% of communication is nonverbal, you can't hear the person's tone of voice. You can so easily misinterpret what they've said, and it's just it's just made for disaster.
Yeah.
But aren't there different kinds of anger? Some that require an immediate response, where there's something crucial happening, something potentially fatal, as opposed to something that just hurts someone's feelings.
Sure.
A range of.
Sure. Of course. Yeah. That's why we have to keep working with it. It's not just self-evident how to work with this. So, when John Buchanan was preaching about this text, he was talking about the choices that we have when we feel anger. You can express it appropriately for the purpose of healing, which, if you did hear my sermon, that would be the difference between being nice and being kind. You can own it. You can acknowledge its potential for hurting others. You could express it to a third party, which is sort of like writing it in an email that you don't send. You can talk about it with God. God, I'm angry at him or her. I'm hurt, and I'm angry, and I don't want to be. I want to be healed. Help me and recreate me. Now, let's go back to the scriptures and look at the verses 23 through 24, which is what I preached my sermon on. Let's together, in case you didn't hear that, when you're offering your gift at the altar, you go to, and we don't use altars in the sanctuary in the Reformed tradition, But if you think of the altar as the place where you are bringing your whole self to God, you're dedicating yourself in service, or giving your life to God, or you're bringing your money to God, or you're way back in the day, they had animal sacrifices that would have been brought to the altar. In our case, probably the communion table would be the similar piece of furniture. That's where we bring our offerings. But think about, you're about to make your offering at the table or at the altar. And then you remember. Why do you think someone would come to mind when you're about ready to make your gift? That somebody has something against you. Yes, Mark?
Maybe financially somebody owes you something, and oh, I could have given more today if so-and-so hadn't forgotten to pay me back.
Okay, that's a possibility, sure.
Well, it's a public act, so are you exposing yourself to the community? And if you're not honest in that exposure, it should stay someplace.
Okay. In Isaiah 6, go ahead, David.
I like your point about, most often we experience our way into right living as opposed to trying to think our way into right living. So there's no moment, I think, that we're most open to the Holy Spirit than coming to communion. So, I mean, it's kind of gratifying or encouraging that thought would come at that most vulnerable
Right.
point.
And if you think about Isaiah 6, where the prophet had a vision when he went into the temple and became aware of God's presence, and then almost immediately after he's aware of God's presence, then he moves into a place of confession. I'm not worthy to be in your presence. So sometimes when you come to the altar or you come to the table, that's also the moment, oh my goodness, this is such a sacred relationship that I have with God, and I am not worthy. Or someone may come to mind that has something against you, or that you have something against someone else. But let's look at that. Who has the grievance in this passage? It's the other person. And we would think that it would be, if we have a grievance against someone, right? Because we have a tendency to think that if I'm mad at you, it's my responsibility to go to you and straighten it out. But that's not what this is. This is if you're aware that someone else is upset with you, it's your responsibility to go to them, which I think is harder. It's hard enough to go to someone else when you're upset with them. But if someone else is upset with me, most of the time it's not because I did something wrong. Right? I didn't intend to hurt anybody. I didn't intend to make you mad. Really, my motives were all really good. So why do I have to do the work of reconciliation? Because it wasn't my fault, which of course is not the way the other person sees it. So the responsibility for reconciliation, this is where Jesus is really going deeper with the meaning of the law into our inner hearts. The responsibility for reconciliation lies with you, okay? So I think that's, yes?
When I know that somebody is very upset with me and doesn't like me at all, but I don't know the reason why. What should I do?
Well, if you were to follow the passage, you might go to that person and say, it feels like, and I want to make sure you hear this part, it feels like, because you don't know that that person doesn't like you, but you think they don't like you. I've had people come to me and say, why are you so mad at me? And I wasn't mad at them.
But I know because there are other people that agree that there is someone that dislikes me intensely.
Well, then if you choose to follow this, you might go to them and just see, if there's anything that you need to apologize for or try to understand better. But let me also say that in this text, it doesn't say go and be reconciled with your brother or sister, but to your brother or sister, because you don't have any control about how the other person is going to respond to you, right? If it said go and be reconciled with, we could never bring our offering to the table or the altar, because probably there will always be somebody that is not completely in harmony with us. But hopefully we will practice saying or doing as much as we can to know that we have extended reconciliation to the other as best as we know how, and that in our heart we are open and loving of that other person and at peace.
I know that other person is a child of God.
That's right.
And I also know that that other person is very active and active favorably here in this church.
Good. So, here's what we're going to do. In the 2 rooms across the hallway are set up chairs in pairs. And I think there's enough if we go in the 2 rooms. I want each of us to take your Bible with you, to place it near one of those pairs of chairs as if it's your altar. So you're sort of creating your little altar there. And you can choose if you want to take a pen and a journal or a piece of paper with you and write this as you do it, or just do it. But I want you to physically, because your body knows things that your mind doesn't, all right? So that's why it's really important that we physically live into this. As you're placing your Bible near a pair of chairs, see who comes to mind as someone who has something against you. Or it might be that what comes to your mind is someone that you have something against. Just see what God puts on your heart. After you place, after you've created the altar, that's not your gift, that's the altar, and you see who comes to mind. Then I want you to sit down in one of the chairs and you start the conversation. And you might not get very far, because even just meeting with the person might be in itself as far as you get today. But let's see if you can go farther. Talk to the other person, and then I want you to physically move and sit in the other chair from that person's perspective, and let that person talk back to you. And move back and forth between the 2 chairs until I come around and ring the chimes, which will be probably in about 15 minutes.
We'll be having a conversation with ourselves.
You're going to actually, it will seem like it's yourself, but when you sit in the other chair, you're actually going to try to speak as if you are that other person.
We'll be able to come in here and get our coats and have time
You will.
to do that.
Yes.
Make the 11 o'clock start.
You will. So I will,
Don't want to rush things.
if you get to the point in your conversation in which you do feel like there's been some reconciliation, now remember, this isn't, you may decide after the class today to go and have a real conversation, or you may not, but this is practice about reconciling to someone, okay? If you feel like you've made some progress and you're ready to put your gift at the altar before you come back in, go ahead and do that. If you don't, just come back in the room, but the chimes will be your indication. So is everybody clear?
I'm sorry to be so thick-headed, but why are we going in 2s if we're doing this by ourselves?
You're not going in 2s. You're going by yourself to find a pair of chairs. And if they're all taken in the 2 rooms across the hall, just come on back in here and put 2 chairs together. And if some of you can do this with many, many things, just journaling your voice, and then you write as the other voice. And give your initials for your voice and give initials or the name to the other person. You can do it that way too. But this morning, I'd love for us to physically do it, okay? Is everybody clear?
Where do you put the Bible?
Anywhere you want, wherever you want to create it as if you're having this,
Like on the floor in between the 2 chairs?
that would be fine. Anywhere close to the chairs. All right? We'll see you in about 15 minutes. So most of us are back. So you don't need to reveal anything Or if any of you would like to share just a little bit about what that process was like for you, I'd be very interested to hear.
Yeah. Vicky, thank you very much to you. You sort of straightened me out so that I really was able to have a conversation with the person with whom I need to reconcile. And that person had a conversation back to me, and I could hear a number of things that were very important for me to incorporate in my head and listen to.
Okay. Anybody else have an experience of hearing?
Thank you, Vicky, for showing me how to do this, because I was really confused.
You're welcome. Anybody else have an experience of hearing something you hadn't heard before from the other person? Yes? Yeah? All kinds of things. Okay. Oh, okay. How many were not able to, you didn't really feel like you reached a place of resolution in that quick period of time? Yeah. So, well, where you felt like it was finished. So that's typical. I would encourage you to return to the exercise at home and do it again or longer. Walter Wink, who created the exercise, who's the biblical scholar that I mentioned earlier, I don't remember if his brother had a grievance against him or vice versa, but he said he did this exercise often over a period of 11 years before he felt reconciled to his brother.
So Larry, here, just
I found it difficult to be the other person's voice. I still had my bias, if you will, impacting the other person's voice. And so it wasn't a totally objective conversation on their part.
Sure.
And so I was still projecting to a degree.
Sure.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I kind of made it work the way I wanted it to, but what I think was helpful about it was it gave me a chance to hear myself in a different chair. You know. So
how would this come across?
Maybe not as eloquent as I thought, or maybe not as effective, or maybe just not as trite as what I thought it was sounding. So the physical moving back from one chair to another is a great mechanic. I think I heard more about myself by trying to be the other.
And I ditto to that. Yeah, that's the experience that I had, too. Thank you very much, Vicky, after you showed me.
Margaret?
Vicky, I picked up more on reconciling to something and someone rather than reconciling with. The person I did the exercise about, if not with, is someone I generally get along with very well, but it's a strange stage in the relationship. And so we're kind of talking about, well, what stage is it and what relationship is this? And I feel more reconciled to, all right, we're in this stage, rather than, oh, there's a reconciliation with, and therefore it's a different stage. So this is how it is right now, rather than I changed something.
They're quite the opposite of resolution. It just provoked curiosity. You know, what would she really say if I asked the question? So it was good. I mean, it was good. It set an agenda kind of for the non-resolution and moving to a new place.
Right. So I would encourage you who feel moved to actually do this with a real person, the person who came to mind, because it's hard work, you may want to even tell a classmate or someone who's a friend of yours that you want to do this, and ask them to ask you in a month if you've done it, and support you or pray for you knowing that you're going to try. And this is all about, as I said at the beginning, living our way into a new way of thinking more than thinking our way into a new way of living. So your Bible study today is really how do you embody what the Bible teaching is about. And the good news is that being a Christian is less about thinking or believing certain things and much more about loving. It's about a relationship. It's your relationship with God, and it's your relationship with your neighbors, and it's your relationship with yourself. So, happy day.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.